Here to cover all things crime, history, and politics, we are at the desk. I'm your host, Shay Iyer, and in today's episode, we will be talking about recent executive actions regarding the Department of Education, learn more about its history, and delve into the infamous murder trial of Aaron Hernandez. Now, come take a seat with us at the desk. Welcome back to ATD. First, it's time to send it over to the politics panel to discuss the recent executive order dismantling the Department of Education. Over to you, Yaya.
Thanks, Shay. Established in 1979, the Department of Education has overseen laws and educational programs on the federal level. From taking charge of federal loans to enforcing civil rights laws, the federal agency has undeniably impacted American education. Now, almost 46 years later, the current administration is seeking to dismantle it. Before we get to that, however, we have to talk about the security leak that just happened. On Monday, March 24th, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic wrote an article revealing that he had been included in a text chat with high-ranking White House officials, including Vice President Vance and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, where war plans were disclosed just 2 hours before the U.S. launched an attack against the Houthis in Yemen. So, guys, this has made headlines. This is all I've been seeing on my phone for the last 24 hours. And before we get into it, I just want to start. The Houthis in Yemen have been, I want to say, a proverbial thorn in the American side with all the embargoes that they've been, or the attacks they've been launching on U.S. ships and things like that. So, right before these text chats were leaked, or it was revealed that they were leaked, the U.S. launched an airstrike against Yemen, which was, I think, the first of its kind in ever, or in a while at least.
At least in a while.
And then, bam, all of a sudden we learned that a journalist has been included in this text chat, this group chat of high-ranking White House officials. So, Ryan, I want to start with you. What do you think of our almost 21st century Pentagon Papers?
Well, it's funny. Jeffrey Goldberg obviously wrote his op-ed about it on The Atlantic. I'm sure The Atlantic actually skyrocketed in subscriptions after that, but there's not much to say besides it's a little embarrassing, and it's honestly it's a little funny too, just like seeing these people texting each other who we voted for and who we only see on TV. It's just, well, not we as in everyone voted for, but just generally like an option on the ballot, and someone that you usually don't get the chance to meet and talk to is sending emojis and, just talking about life. It's just, and I think Jeffrey Goldberg, actually, he doesn't see, but he was very lucky to be able to see how these people are without knowing that the media is on top of them. And also, at the same time, I think we need to also understand that it's important to keep things like these top secret, because Jeffrey Goldberg is someone who you don't want to add to a very, top secret group chat. He doesn't have code word clearance, but let's just hope someone else who doesn't have the best interest of America in mind doesn't get added to a similar group chat or a group chat of the sort, including people like Hegseth and all of them, just putting whatever comes to mind, like emojis and all that. Jackson agrees with me. He knows.
Yeah, so what I like to say about it is, all we know so far is that Goldberg was included in this chat and that he was given access to some classified information that he should not be given access to. We don't know exactly who gave him access. Trump's claim is that it was one of Mike Waltz's workers, one of his lowers in the administration. So it is somebody within the Trump administration probably made a mistake. That's the most likely scenario. I don't think Hegseth meant to send this information to the wrong person. I think that this was a chat amongst, high-ranking White House officials. And obviously they do have to discuss these things before they happen, because it is a government operation against terrorists. So I think it was a mistake on the administration as a whole, not on one person. That'd be my analysis so far. If more evidence comes out, I would definitely be able to comment on that.
Yeah, I'd like to add, they didn't tiptoe properly. They used a little bit of code in there, I believe. I don't want to say that definitely happened, but I believe a little bit of code was used in there. And at the same time, I don't think they were so careful about what they were saying in an app like Signal, which is not cleared. And it's something that's embarrassing. And it's happened before, as you said, Pentagon Papers, Hillary Clinton making a comment about it. We've seen it happen before. It's nothing new. It's just something that we need to keep an eye on as technology and generative AI continues to develop. And again, adding people who aren't code word cleared, who might be a little bit more dangerous than Jeffrey Goldberg.
I just wonder, how does something like this happen? How do you accidentally add this journalist, the editor for The Atlantic, to what's supposed to be a secure, or that the app specifically is not super secure. It's encrypted, but it's not as secure as like a government. It's not cleared. It's not a government service, that they can privately communicate through. So I just wonder, like, who messed up? Who did he think he was adding? And what would have happened if no one noticed? What if he never left? He could have just stayed silent and stayed through the entire group chat and not said anything, and no one would have known. And I just think it's just strange, because it makes you wonder if this is where they're talking about some highly classified information, like these war plans. What else are they talking about on there? What other security issues or clearances can?
Well, for one, J.D. Vance gave his opinions on Europe.
Yeah, he said they were pathetic, which is great because they love bashing our allies.
I have a question for I'm opening this up to everyone. Do you think that Goldberg was right in disclosing the fact that he was added to this group chat? Because on the one hand, obviously, maybe he's trying to perform his watchdog duty as a journalist, but on the other hand, like, that kind of signals to not only our allies, but potentially our enemies that, like, security is not as tight as it should be. And so do you think that he was in the right in exposing this, or do you think this is something that he should have probably put second to, or he probably should have put his journalistic duty second to national security?
Well, as a journalist, it is his job to report the truth. That's what I would say. And also, he reported the stuff after the attack already happened. So it wasn't like the actual quality of the attack was even affected by him knowing. So it wasn't like there was any real damage this time around. But you're right, the long-term implications of this could be bad, because they need to use a more secure platform than what they use this time, because you cannot have a journalist from The Atlantic getting into a private conversation like that. And because, like you said, you don't know if an enemy can get in there. You don't know if a foreign identity. You don't know any other person can get in there. And I think that it is definitely a big time screw up on the Trump administration. And I would like to see if there was some sort of foreign intervention in this particular breach, just this one in of itself. Because I don't think Goldberg had any intention of getting in there. No. I think that was an act on his part. We don't know if there was an enemy who did this, who tried to get Goldberg in there as a way to get to the United States security.
I mean, I'm just a little worried about how secure our government really is right now, especially with a lot of the top Trump officials right now are denying anything about war plans or anything like that. Hegseth's denied it, even though the White House confirmed it. Gabbard denied it over in front of the House today, I believed, and she also wouldn't answer extra questions about it because obviously it just happened. But it's just, as a journalist, I think, going back to what you said, he absolutely did the right thing in sharing this, and it wouldn't have affected it otherwise because it came out after the attacks had already happened. And it's also known that he hasn't published everything he saw there. He only chose a few screenshots, but he is considering publishing up more things from it, which I think becomes a little bit of a journalistic question in himself. So they're going to have to just be ethical about it and make sure to cause as least harm as possible with whatever messages they have and whatever they want to put out.
I mean, there's not much I could add. I agree with both of them. I think obviously he's going to take advantage of it. He found a lead. Why doesn't he write an op-ed about it? I mean, he's a writer for The Atlantic. I'd do the same thing he did. Wouldn't matter, Democrat, Republican. If I'm getting inside information, I'm going to make sure that I protect the intelligence of the United States of America. And then when I know it's protected, I'm going to take advantage of the situation because I'm a journalist. I'm going to tell the truth and I'm going to take advantage of all the viewership I can get out of it. I'm going to make sure that people understand what I saw. I'm going to make sure that I'm not lying and that I'm actually showing proof that it actually happened. And I think that's exactly what Goldberg did. He did the right thing. He enriched himself and protected the United States at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important. Again, going back to that watchdog aspect of journalism. I mean, obviously, when things go right, that's not what makes the news, right? Mm-hmm. But we, as American citizens, want to know that, our war plans are secure and stuff. So I think it's a crazy position for someone like Goldberg to be in. I mean, I don't know. I think I would have been in shock if I had woken up one day and I was in a freaking group chat with J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth and they're talking about bombing people. I'd be like, what's going on right now? Who's getting fired today? So not today, but let's see in the next couple of weeks, somebody's getting fired.
I would assume it'd be someone within their Trump administration, not Hegseth or not Vance or not any one of the higher ups.
No, definitely.
It would be someone who was maybe put in charge of one particular like chat or something more small that maybe made a mistake.
I think
it was Waltz. I think it was Waltz that's going to end up taking the fall
Waltz
for
possibly,
it. Yeah,
but, but it could be someone who works for him as well.
Yeah, Trump said he learned his lesson, so maybe he'll stay. But I think if anyone's going to end up taking the fall, it's going to be
As
Waltz.
far as the higher ups, you're correct.
Yeah,
Yes, he's the most likely candidate for that. Anything, Ryan?
No.
It's a crazy time, but we're going to go ahead and shift gears now, and we're going to talk about the Department of Education. So since its establishment in 1979, there have been instances where it's been demoted to an office, and then now it's a full-blown department, but you haven't seen something like this in a long time. So there's a lot of uncertainty around this. There's talk of like, oh, all of the services aren't going away. They're just being shifted to a new department. They're just being shifted somewhere else. So Ryan P., I want to start with you. Do you think that Congress will give the go-ahead for this department to be dismantled?
I think it's a political long shot. They need a supermajority in the House and the Senate, and they just don't have the numbers right now. Maybe they can convince a few Democrats to go their way if they truly make the department kind of like a shell of what it used to be, and they'll just go, well, we might as well get rid of it anyway. Maybe that happens, but I don't think Congress will go for that. A lot of Republicans, or a couple of Republicans, are come from districts that would really benefit from having the Department of Education. So I don't think they're going to go against their constituents there. But I just think it's interesting because the Department of Education is like one of the newest departments. It only makes up 4% of the budget, and it's also the smallest when it comes to workforce size, of around 4,000. So what is this really about? Downsizing the government, or is it about attacking education? Because we know that the Republicans, and while the Department of Education doesn't control curriculum, they provide funding and they give incentives for states to reach certain standards and meet certain quotas and requirements. If that goes away, we just don't know what could happen when there's no one there to enforce the civil rights laws in schools like the Department of Education is supposed to. There's issues like that just become so concerning.
Yeah, same thing with Title IX.
Yep.
Yeah, everything of the sorts. Listen, I've never really paid so much attention to like a T with this situation, because there have been promises that the powers and the money are transferable to other departments and will still be offered. So if that is the case, I say it's a go. But if that's not the case, I'm a little concerned.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Student with Disabilities Act, that'll be moved to the Health and Human Resources Department, and student aid will also move somewhere else. So that's actually the majority of the Department of Education spending will actually be staying in the federal government. But what he wants to move away from is the federal government getting involved with secondary and like elementary education. He wants that to be completely controlled by states.
The question I have is does the expertise follow the money? Like, is there going to be people in those departments that it's being transferred to who are going to know what to do with that money and be experts on the matter?
I would say most likely yes.
Okay.
Because Trump needs to have an answer to this, and I don't think he wants to make himself look bad by having these other people fired and then having this new department have people who don't know what they're doing. So I would assume yes.
I would push back on that though, because then it kind of comes to this idea of like, well, what's the point now? Because if you're saying that we're trying to downsize the bureaucracy, downsize federal government, but you're not getting rid of anything, you're just shifting it around, then that's now adding more workload on departments that are already probably overworked, and people are going to have to learn new things, and understaffed, because then you're just going to have to hire more people. So
this is not really so much about getting rid of the bureaucracy as much. This is more about increasing the quality of education, because like you said, the states that are most reliant on the Department of Education are states that are really bad education. And I think one of the problems is they become too reliant on the federal government. And so now parents have lost a lot of control over their local districts and the states. And when you have education that's up to the states, more parents have more control.
But education already is up to the states, though.
Yeah, that is
but not directly, though.
Those red states would just have more leeway to enforce.
We've talked about these incentives and stuff. I think what happens is that interferes with the state's processes, and I think that should not exist, which is why I'm fine with that part of the Department of Education being gone.
So what happens when schools in southern states decide to start incorporating religion into their class, into their daily routine? Stuff like that is it's blocked and protected against by the Department of Education.
Mm-hmm.
I just think if the Department of Education goes away, education is only going to get worse for people, because it provides assistance to low-income people that need to get it or want an education, which is essential to our democracy, because an educated republic is a good republic. But Republicans know that if you have a college degree, you are more likely to vote Democrat. They've known this, and they've been going at this for years. criticizing education in the department, woke ideology, DEI, everything that could be found in schools. It's really all part of an elaborate plot that's been going on since Reagan was running for president in 1980, 1 year after it got established, to really not only defund, but delegitimize education, especially higher education, if we're going to talk about Columbia in a couple minutes.
And to your point, when Reagan tried to dismantle it, he did very much feel the effects, and he went back, and that was one of the things he actually famously, he didn't directly apologize for it, but he recognized it was an error.
Yes, and what I'd say is I don't think it's likely that he'll be able to completely dismantle the department. I do think that, yes, the supermajority, it's very unlikely that he'll be able to completely get rid of it. I think he'll be able to get rid of some of it, obviously through his executive power, but yes, a complete dismantling of the Department of Education is most likely not going to happen. But I do understand the idea behind it. I do think that we need to kind of be able to look at the department and maybe at least refigure it a little bit and at least reallocate some of the resources.
And I think that's valid. I think that's definitely valid because obviously, it's Einstein's quote, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a new outcome. But I just, like everybody said, I don't think it's going to happen for a long shot. But staying within education, higher education, we're talking about, getting the government out of higher education and letting states and stuff decide what to do. But then you have $400 million from being withheld from an institution like Columbia unless they comply with certain orders. What do we make of that?
That's a little different.
Dangerous.
It's a little different because then that goes into foreign policy in a way, with the way we are seeing deportations and Tom Homan. And we are seeing, first of all, that's research grants, most of it. That's number one. And number two, a lot of it also connects to the Israel-Palestine conflict, which is a greater issue. So to tie it just into the Department of Education, I think does a disservice.
No, we're not distancing ourselves from the Department of Education. Just the act of saying, if you guys don't overhaul or if you don't review these policies, we as the federal government are going to
I would agree with Brian, though. This
withhold.
isn't really as much of an education issue.
Right.
It's more of he's arguing it's a preventing anti-Semitism, preventing the promotion of terrorism.
Well,
So it's not really as much an education issue.
It's about precedence. If he can do this with this issue, he has the leeway to do it for other things. If he can just withhold money from institutions that don't do what he wants, which is what he's doing right now, what does that mean? What does that mean for education? Like I was saying before, the rights war in education, that's what it's all
Well, do you
about.
think what Columbia's been doing is right, though?
Withholding money from Columbia, 400 million?
No, do you think what Columbia's been doing is right?
In regards to what?
Allowing Jewish students to be harassed, blocked from classrooms, things like that. Do you think that's right?
I feel I would have to see actual evidence of that happening for me to comment on.
I've seen several videos of it. There's been close to 3,000 instances of that happening across the country, not just at Columbia. That being said, it's a nuanced issue. People are allowed to have free speech. I agree. But a lot of people have taken it too far, and there has been a lot of Hamas worshiping, Hamas promoting going on in the United States.
I think worshiping is a stretch.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone's worshiping Hamas. I think
I would agree with Jackson, though. I think in broader terms, Columbia has not been doing a good job at protecting its students, period.
Or its property.
Or at all. Because I haven't seen what you've seen, Jackson. I've seen on the other side where students who have been in encampments, I've seen a video of somebody being hit on the head with a metal crowbar for in pro-Palestinian protests. I think that Columbia has not been doing a good job at protecting students who are protesting. But then also that goes into now Trump's policies of, ban masks on campus when it comes to protesting, overhauling their policies on protesting. And I think that the reason for me I see it as an education issue is because also students have always been at the forefront of social movements. So now coming in as the federal government, as the executive branch of government, and saying you as an institution have to overhaul all of these policies that, in my opinion, have been helping to protect students' free speech rights. I think that's where the issue comes in, because education is at the forefront of change, of knowledge, of raising a new generation of leaders. So when we're now starting to block this new generation of leaders from leading in a space where they're supposed to feel safe and protected, that's because if it's starting with that,
we have guys is going to hunt people down right now. A judge just blocked their attempt. They've been chasing this one girl at a Columbia who's active in a pro-Palestinian protest. Thankfully, they've been hunting her, and she was going to get locked up and deported. But a judge blocked that, and I think you're going to see a lot more things like that, especially out there emerging pretty soon.
The parallel here, I agree with your point, but the parallel here is that free speech does not necessarily connect to destruction of private property.
Mhm.
And at the same time, Trump sees this as a lot of his money that the federal government is giving. He sees it as his money because he's the elected representative with control over it. He sees it going to an organization that's not protecting their own property and is misrepresenting what they believe free speech is by letting people go into their private libraries. We're seeing some looting. We're seeing people blocked out of classes. We're seeing physical violence, as you said, crowbar. So that's the parallel here, is what is free speech and what is danger and what is destruction of property.
Yeah, I like to add to that. So it's also promotion of violence. I mean, if you find individuals who have openly promoted violence against Jews or anyone else, that person can be punishable, can be punished by law. Now, yeah, there is free speech. That is an important part of our country, an important part of our democracy, everything like that. But yeah, we do have to make sure we can draw the line clearly between what is free speech and what is not free speech. And that's where the line is kind of blurred here, and that's where there's a debate.
And
I just feel like it's going to be it could be a slippery slope. That's
just,
my main.
Well,
but
everything could be a slippery slope.
It's been a never. The problem with that is it's been a never-ending debate, and that's why Colombia is in such a tough spot.
Yeah.
Is because it's a never-ending debate on what's free speech, what's overreach from governments, from governance. Pardon me. What's overreach from governance, and what is just letting anarchy happen. They can't find that divide because every situation has to be treated differently, and every situation law enforcement has to respond differently. So it's very difficult.
I want to go back to what you said about research too, because I think that's something that we haven't touched on enough. Is because if the federal government can say, hey, we don't really like what you're researching, or hey, we're just gonna pull back our funding unless you change what you're researching, then it's like, well,
I think the government
next?
doesn't want this university wasting money. Essentially, if they're finding that they're research things that don't really matter and they're wasting federal money, they don't want that money being spent.
But I feel like that's a decision that should be left.
What private institute,
I feel like that should be up to Columbia, but unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. While the Department of Education can't be dismantled without the green light from Congress, the unprecedented attempt still has some Americans feeling anxious about the future of their education. In order to understand the DOE, we need a full look at the history, which is exactly what we have coming up next. Over to you, Shay.
Thanks, Yaya. That's right, folks. Up next, we'll be taking a deep dive into the history of the Department of Education. Over to you, Abby.
Thanks, Shay. The United States Department of Education has a complex history that dates back to the 19th century. This evolution includes decades of changing federal involvement in education. First, there was the Morrill Land Grant Act of 1862, which gave land to each state to establish agricultural and mechanical colleges. Penn State was one of the first 57 colleges in the nation created through this act, and is Pennsylvania's only land grant institution. At the time, its name was the Agricultural College of Pennsylvania. These new institutions expanded opportunities for higher education to the working class. Shortly after this, the first Department of Education was signed into law in 1867 under President Andrew Johnson. It collected information and statistics about schools across the United States. This data was used to measure the state of education and help create recommendations for improving educational practices. But just a year later, it was downgraded to the Office of Education under the Department of the Interior. This move came after concerns that it might have too much control over local schools. About a century later, the space race between the US and Soviet Union began. With the Soviet Union's successful launch of Sputnik, the United States was worried about falling behind in the technological and scientific development. This pushed federal funding to get more involved in funding education, leading to the National Defense Education Act of 1958. This legislation granted $1 billion of funding to improve science, technology, engineering, math, and foreign language programs. It also focused on giving lower-income students who had promising academic futures in these fields a chance to pursue higher education from the 1960s to the 1970s. This act more than doubled college enrollment. Today's Department of Education was established by Congress on October 17, 1979, under President Jimmy Carter's administration. Its purpose was to ensure equal access to education, shape education policy, provide financial resources, and uphold federal education laws. That includes Title I funding, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the No Child Left Behind Act, and the Child Nutrition Act. Over 50 million children in public schools are served by these initiatives. The federal student aid program has provided over $111 billion in grants, loans, and work study to about 13 million students pursuing higher education. Since the department's establishment, between party lines, there have been disagreements about its existence. The Republican Party has called to disband it, arguing that matters of education should be left up to the states. This has been President Trump's main point driving his effort to shut down this department. On the other side of the aisle, Democratic state lawmakers say losing funding from this department will hurt schools and students across the nation. Completely eliminating the department, Congress would have to pass a new law in favor of doing so. That's all we have today about the history of the Department of Education. Now back to you, Shay.
Thanks, Abby. It's time for the crime panel to discuss the murder case of former Patriots tight end Aaron Hernandez. Over to you, Sophia.
Thanks, Jay. Welcome back to the Crime Panel. Today we'll be talking about a case that has captivated America for years, the Aaron Hernandez murder trial. On June 26, 2013, Aaron Hernandez was charged with the first-degree murder of Odin Lloyd and was officially convicted of the crime on April 15, 2015. However, his legal troubles do not stop there. In May 2014, Hernandez was indicted for murdering 2 people near a Boston nightclub, but was later acquitted. He was also acquitted of a witness intimidation charge after being involved in a 2013 shooting. 2 years after being sentenced to life in prison without any possibility of parole, Hernandez took his own life. Join us tonight as we try to unpack his upbringing, his rise to football stardom, and the events that ultimately led to his fall from grace. So, Savannah, can you kind of talk to us about his upbringing and his background?
Yeah, so he was born November 6, 1989 in Bristol, Connecticut, and right from the start, he had a very turbulent relationship with his family. According to his brother in an interview, his father had sexually abused him, and his father passed away when he was very young. And about just a month later, his mom remarried a cousin's husband. And while all this was happening, his brother had a lot of trouble with the law as well. But his career was extremely good. So in high school, he was already a star player. And this actually led to him getting a scholarship from the University of Florida. He was considered to be one of the best tight ends in the country. And this was a very, very big deal because at the time, University of Florida had this incredible reputation. You know, the guy was fit. He had a lot going for him. But junior year, he actually wasn't welcome back. And this is because he had a lot of off the field problems mixed with a lot of issues with the coach. But it ended up working out for him pretty well because that same year, he ended up getting drafted in the 4th round of the NFL for the Patriots. But during his time for the Patriots, he had a lot of off-the-field issues. So this included a shooting at a nightclub and a double homicide in Boston. And the list just goes on and on and on of stuff he was involved with outside of his career that really just wasn't looking good. Now, aside from the overall case, one of his main issues is after his death, he was actually diagnosed with CTE, which is a brain disease often found in former football players that is found to do with, repeat injuries, repeat concussions, and leads to violent behavior.
Yeah, and the person that did the research on his brain, Dr. Ann McKee, she's a research for, a brain expert at the University of Boston. And here's some quotes about her that kind of interesting. She said this at the end of the documentary. He had an advanced disease in the frontal lobe, which are very important for decision making, judgment, and cognition. They showed a picture of his brain, like at the end. He was missing like a whole chunk of his brain, and it was pretty gruesome to look at. I mean, you saw a normal brain, normal stuff going on, everything there, side by side, huge chunk missing. And I mean, you're missing that, making bad judgment, cognition. And then another quote. This would be the first case we've ever seen of that damage of somebody so young, and this substantial damage took years of buildup. He started playing football, of course, when he was young. Awesome tight end, great player. But when you find yourself on the field, you're going to get hit a lot. When he was 14 years old, he got knocked unconscious. And that, I think, in my opinion, could have possibly started his long brain injuries. CTE could have started there, even though it wasn't nobody knew because nobody tested him. And then, climbs up the ranks, goes to Florida. At that time, that's the place to be. Tim Tebow was there. Everybody watched Florida football. He's just 17 years old. And then what you said, he went to the draft just 20 years old. Career took off, eventually signed a $40 million contract, which in today's NFL is still good, just that money alone. But in today's NFL, that very well could be up there with the highest paid players and
Super Bowl champion.
And so Brain was just, I don't know, it's just.
Well, I wanted to mention, since we've been talking about CTE recently, after Hernandez was posthumously diagnosed with it, he joined the statistic of being one in 345 former NFL players who have been diagnosed with that disease after their deaths. So this is not uncommon when it comes to NFL players. And I think, Ryan, you want to talk more about his relationship with his coaches.
Oh, well, first of all, in college, he played for Urban Meyer, and well, I pray for you, if you ever play for Urban Meyer, that you walk out of there with any ounce of energy left in you, because that guy will work you to the end.
Either that or a championship.
Absolutely, that too. Actually, two in this case. But anyway, getting to the NFL, where, as you said, 4th round pick for the New England Patriots, got along well with Belichick, and the media actually thought he was becoming a better person. And so on the other side too, same did the owner, Robert Kraft. And after continuing developments and he said some very suspicious things to the media, but he got along very well with Robert Kraft. Robert Kraft had some medical issues in his family, and Hernandez knowingly rejected some of his own salary to give it back to Kraft, which was something that on paper looked very nice. And, he just continuously worked hard, and he was just a very good image. But unfortunately, behind the scenes has some issues. There were, I don't even know if they're really rumors anymore. It's pretty much out there that he was gay. That was something that he didn't want to get out, just with the times and the people he was getting along with. He was a star football player, and a lot of people were coming to admire him on the team. Super Bowl champion. He had it all, and he started hanging out with the wrong people, and he wasn't communicating that with Kraft. He missed a few practices. And, after the whole thing came out, a couple days before he got arrested, after he killed the poor young man, Robert Kraft saw him working out at the gym alone, sitting, and he came up to him and he said, "Is everything okay? And did you kill that man? Because if you did, I'm going to get the best lawyer that I could possibly buy." And he basically said, "You don't have to do that. I didn't kill him." Got arrested a couple days later. The rest was history. He's a serial killer.
Yeah. Well, I want to go more in depth on the murder of Odin Lloyd. So on June 18th, 2013, police searched Hernandez's home in connection to the shooting of Odin Lloyd. Now, Lloyd was a 27-year-old man who lived in the Boston area. He was found in an industrial park a mile away from Hernandez's house with multiple fatal gunshot wounds to his back and his chest. Now, when Aaron picked Odin up, Lloyd sensed something was wrong immediately, and Lloyd actually texted his sister, said, "Hey, by the way, do you know who I'm with?" The quote text said NFL, just to give the hint of, you know who I'm with. And it was also a very messy scene. You can tell that DNA evidence did not matter to Hernandez. There was a blunt butt at the scene.
He was shot in the torso 6 times and left face up.
Yeah. And then at the same time, you're just seeing kind of his path going through this crime scene. And it's a mile away from his home in a place of town where Lloyd doesn't know anything. All the arrows are pointing at Hernandez.
You also didn't forget, Sophia, as you probably, well, actually, I'm sorry, not Sophia, pardon me. Megan, what you know is that he had car keys that belonged to the car of Aaron Hernandez. And that essentially basically gave it away, that all this evidence that's pointing at Aaron Hernandez, well, he has the car keys on him.
Yeah, and it was a rental car, too. It's just suspicious after suspicious with that one. A week before Hernandez's arrest, the Patriots severed all ties with him.
Before he even made it to court.
Before he even was, it was a huge thing, especially in the Boston area when you're preparing for a trial with a name like that. It's almost like the O.J. Simpson case, where it's a household name. You can't really find a lot of people to serve on a jury like that. But on June 26, 2013, he was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and 5 gun-related charges. Now, he was found guilty on April 15th, 2015, and automatically got a sentence to life in prison without parole. But when it comes to this case itself, two things we haven't talked about was, number one, motive, and number two, what happened to the weapon used. So,
And what about the previous two killings when they found the car?
Well, that was after Mr. Lloyd's
Right, but it's in connection.
death. Yes. Oh, very connected.
Well, I think it's interesting his connection to this man. It was his fiance's, I think, boyfriend, sister's.
His fiance.
Lloyd was dating the sister of Hernandez's fiance.
Boyfriend.
And there's a lot of connections when it comes to this, but when they were looking for more evidence, they were able to grab photos and videos from inside the Hernandez house of him that night with a gun, never seen ever again. Now, when it comes to motive, you mentioned it a little bit earlier. I want to talk a little bit more in depth about it just because it is very important to this case. His sexuality. So when he was in prison, he came out as gay to his mother, his brother DJ, and his attorney.
And a fellow inmate. A fellow inmate.
And a fellow inmate, yes. But this was kind of under wraps for him. He did not want anybody to know about his sexuality, especially if you are in the NFL. That is a very masculine sport. You have a fiance, you have a child. And something like this coming out, if you're not being destroyed in the media already, this is what's going to destroy you. And so what people are looking at for motive is that somebody found out. And unfortunately, it was Odin.
Hey, and I'd like to point out, too, one thing, while Aaron Hernandez was on trial, you know what the Patriots kept doing?
Kept paying him. I know that. They kept playing. They kept winning.
Oh, yeah, they kept winning. There you go.
Kept doing everything. I mean, it was like almost,
winning.
it was almost like life was normal for the Patriots. And we mentioned earlier that he signed this $40 million contract. When you think of sports brands, sports teams, and you hear the word Patriots, it's very business. They've been the best sports brand and the best sports team pretty much all of sports since the beginning of the century, basically. And for them to go out of their way and give him a pretty big contract like how they did, that's just, that's how much zero knowledge they had of anything Aaron Hernandez was doing.
Especially at the age of 20.
Well, I think it's interesting that after he went to prison, he unfortunately ended his own life, and the Patriots ended up getting sued by members of
his fiance back in 2019 filed a civil lawsuit against the Patriots for, a lot of things under the sun, whether it was them letting him get away with all of this mental health and then him being away from his family. In the end of it, the lawsuit was dismissed, but there's stuff still happening to this day when it involves this case.
Yeah, I think another interesting aspect of the case that we haven't touched on was after he took his life, a judge erased his conviction, saying that there was an old principle that claims that a defendant who dies before an appeal is no longer guilty. However, 2 years later, his conviction was then reinstated after the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts claimed that that principle was outdated. So that really shows how the criminal justice, the legal system, how the revision of laws, it really impacted this case.
Especially in the state of Massachusetts with, first degree, you're immediately getting sentenced to life in jail.
Okay, so speed run here because we only have so much more time. But one thing that I'd like to point out, almost like a little ending to the story, is that seeing the Patriots continue to win and almost not face too much punishment for what happened, it can kind of feel disappointing, and it can almost feel like the organization is above any one person, or it doesn't as much care about the lives of its supporters. And that's something that Robert Kraft apologized for. And this, give the guy credit. There's not much he could have done, and there's not much he could have seen as a wealthy man who's not on top of the practices every single day. Which we all know he kind of was. But it's just really unfortunate to see how there's not many consequences to an organization that funded his behavior. I mean, this guy's going out every single night and spending Patriots money on drinks. And it's just like...
He had a second apartment just for drugs and guns that his fiance did not know about.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier the text messages between Aaron Hernandez and Robert Kraft. I mean, in Kraft's eyes, he didn't do anything because that's all Hernandez was saying. I didn't do anything. I'm innocent. You don't have to worry about anything. He shows up to work the next day. He shows up to work so good that he plays in a Super Bowl at the age of 22, which is a dream for people. He shows up to work even better, getting a boatload of money. And then Kraft's eyes, he's like, he's innocent. I don't know what to do. And then it all comes out, and he's like, I have the text messages right here. It says I'm innocent.
Well, I think it's also interesting, just to say again, he was so young when all this was happening. And I think that really did affect his decision making, like what you said about the apartment and the
yeah.
drugs. I just think it was too much for him to
The
handle
fame
at such
hit
a
him when
young
he was
age.
so young.
I mean, yeah, I mean, this all started when he was 14. We didn't mention this. Went to a UConn, which you don't go to a power or a D1 scholar or D1 school when you're 14 years old.
Yeah.
That's just not what happened. And then in the span of 5 years, I mean, I think his dad died. His mother I wouldn't say in his life, but his mother wasn't there for him as much as she probably could have been. And it's just like the span of 5 years, it just went from here to here. And then football was kind of an escape, but he only escaped from football for so much.
With his father dying when he was 16, his father being so connected to his training and just his entire life, it's very easy to become susceptible to people that aren't a good influence on your life. And he's still a good athlete, so he prevailed in the football sense, but off the field, he obviously didn't go too far.
Just downhill for him.
Yep.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. This case definitely expands our perspectives of the legal system by shining a light on the dark side of fame and the significance of issues such as CTE and mental health. Stay tuned in the coming weeks as we explore more captivating true crime cases. Back to you, Shay.
Thanks, Sophia. Sadly, that is all the time we have for today. In the meantime, stay updated with ATD and all of our socials at PSU at the desk, and let us know what you want to see us cover next week. I'm Shay Iyer, and we will see you back at the desk in 2 weeks.